In the grand corridors of Avalonia Palace, where centuries of tradition echo through marble halls, a single piece of jewelry would ignite a family feud that threatened to shake the very foundations of the monarchy. The midnight sapphire tiara, once worn by the beloved Queen Isabella during her fairy tale wedding, had remained locked away for 15 years following her tragic death. But, on this particular autumn evening, as golden leaves danced outside the palace windows, young Princess Elena would dare to wear the crown that had become a symbol of both love and loss. What happened next would test the bonds of family, challenge the rules of succession, and force Queen Regent Viviana to confront ghosts she thought she had buried forever. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the towering windows of Avalonia Palace as Princess Elena carefully lifted the ornate jewelry box from her mother's former dressing table. The 17-year-old princess had been granted access to Queen Isabella's private chambers for the first time since her mother's death in a car accident 15 years ago. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the velvet-lined box, revealing the midnight sapphire tiara in all its breathtaking glory. The tiara was a masterpiece of royal craftsmanship, featuring deep blue sapphires set in intricate silver filigree, with delicate pearls cascading like tears from each precious stone. It had been a wedding gift from King Alexander to his bride, Queen Isabella, representing not just their love but the hope of a new generation for the Kingdom of Avalonia. The tiara had become iconic after Isabella wore it during their televised wedding ceremony, watched by millions around the world. Elena had only seen the tiara in photographs and old video footage of her mother's public appearances. As she held it now, she could almost feel the weight of history and the love her parents had shared. The sapphires seemed to capture and reflect the fading daylight, creating an almost mystical aura around the precious crown. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, watched nervously from the doorway. "Your Highness, perhaps we should ask Queen Regent Viviana for permission before what, Margaret?" Elena interrupted gently but firmly. "Before I hold something that belonged to my own mother? Something that will one day be mine anyway?" Margaret shifted uncomfortably. Since Queen Isabella's death, King Alexander had remarried Queen Regent Viviana, who had assumed many of the traditional roles of a queen consort while Elena was still a minor. The relationship between Elena and her stepmother had always been cordial but distant, marked by an underlying tension that everyone in the palace could sense but no one dared to acknowledge openly. Elena carefully lifted the tiara and walked to the large mirror that had once reflected her mother's image thousands of times. As she placed the crown upon her head, adjusting it to sit perfectly above her dark brown hair, something magical happened. For a moment, she could see her mother's reflection beside her own, smiling with pride and love. The resemblance between mother and daughter was striking, the same warm brown eyes, the same gentle smile, the same regal bearing that seemed to come naturally. "You look just like her," Margaret whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Queen Isabella would be so proud to see you now." Elena smiled, turning her head slightly to catch the light on the sapphires. The tiara felt surprisingly comfortable, as if it had been waiting all these years to find its way back to where it belonged. She had inherited her mother's elegant neck and graceful posture, making the tiara appear as natural on her as it had on Isabella. "Tonight is the harvest gala," Elena said thoughtfully. "The entire court will be there, along with dignitaries from neighboring kingdoms. It would be the perfect opportunity to honor my mother's memory by wearing her tiara." Margaret looked alarmed. "Your Highness, I don't think Queen Regent Viviana would approve. She's been very particular about maintaining certain protocols since your father's health began declining." King Alexander had indeed been struggling with his health in recent months. A mild stroke the previous year had left him weakened, and he had gradually been transferring more royal duties to Viviana. This shift in power dynamics had not gone unnoticed by the court or by Elena herself. Elena studied her reflection more carefully. At 17, she was rapidly approaching her 18th birthday, when she would officially come of age and begin taking on more royal responsibilities. The tiara seemed to symbolize this transition from princess to future queen, from daughter to leader. "Margaret, what do you remember about my mother wearing this tiara?" Elena asked, her voice soft with curiosity. Margaret's face brightened with fond memories. "Oh, Your Highness, she wore it with such grace and dignity." Queen Isabella believed that royal jewelry wasn't just decoration, it was a connection to the people and to history. She said the tiara reminded her that she was serving something greater than herself.
And, after she died? Margaret's expression grew somber. Queen Regent Viviana felt it would be too painful for your father to see anyone else wearing Queen Isabella's jewelry.
She had most of your mother's pieces stored away, saying they would be returned to you when you came of age. Elena nodded slowly, understanding the complicated emotions involved. She couldn't imagine how difficult it must have been for her father to move forward after losing the love of his life. And, Viviana, despite her sometimes cold demeanor, had stepped into an impossible situation, trying to fill the shoes of a beloved queen while raising a daughter who wasn't her own. But, standing here now, wearing her mother's most precious piece, Elena felt a surge of connection to her heritage and her destiny. The tiara wasn't just jewelry, it was a symbol of the legacy she was meant to carry forward. Margaret, please help me choose a dress that would complement the tiara, Elena said with newfound determination. Something elegant but not too elaborate. I want the focus to be on honoring my mother's memory, not on creating a spectacle. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then nodded.
Very well, Your Highness. I think the midnight blue silk gown would be perfect.
It will bring out the sapphires beautifully.
As they began preparing for the evening, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that wearing the tiara tonight would mark a turning point in her life.
She was no longer just the princess living in the shadow of her legendary mother's memory, she was ready to begin creating her own legacy while honoring the past. The Harvest Gala was one of the most important social events of the royal calendar, bringing together the nobility, government officials, and foreign dignitaries. It would be Elena's first major public appearance wearing something so closely associated with her mother, and she knew the symbolism would not be lost on anyone in attendance. Little did she know that Queen Regent Viviana was at that very moment in her own chambers, selecting jewelry for the evening and expecting to be the sole focus of royal attention. The collision of these two strong-willed women, each with their own vision of protocol and propriety, was about to create ripples that would be felt throughout the kingdom. As Elena made her final preparations, adjusting the tiara one last time in the mirror, she whispered a quiet promise to her mother's memory, "I'll make you proud, Mother. I'll wear this with the same grace and dignity you showed, and I'll never forget what it means to serve our people." The stage was set for an evening that would test family bonds, challenge royal traditions, and force everyone involved to confront questions about power, legacy, and the delicate balance between honoring the past and embracing the future. Queen Regent Viviana stood before her grand mirror in the royal suite, adjusting the emerald necklace that had become her signature piece during state functions. At 45, she possessed a striking beauty marked by sharp cheekbones, platinum blonde hair always styled in a perfect chignon, and ice blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her burgundy velvet gown was impeccable, tailored to perfection and adorned with the royal sash of her position. She had worked tirelessly for the past 15 years to establish her own identity within the royal family, never trying to replace Queen Isabella but rather carving out her own space as a capable and dignified regent. The transition hadn't been easy. The people of Avalonia had loved Isabella deeply, and Viviana had faced constant comparisons to her predecessor. "Your Majesty, the car will be ready in 30 minutes, announced her personal secretary, Lady Catherine, entering with a clipboard full of evening protocols.
Excellent. Has Princess Elena confirmed her attendance?
Viviana asked, applying a final touch of lipstick.
Yes, Your Majesty. Princess Elena will be joining the royal party.
She requested that her entrance be announced separately from yours, which I found rather unusual. Viviana paused, her lipstick halfway to her lips.
In all the years of formal events, Elena had always entered with the main royal party, following proper protocol. This deviation was unexpected and, frankly, concerning.
Did she give a reason for this request?
No, Your Majesty.
She simply said it would be more appropriate for tonight's particular circumstances.
A knot of unease formed in Viviana's stomach. Elena had been increasingly independent lately, asking more questions about royal procedures and expressing opinions about palace traditions.
As the princess approached her 18th birthday, she seemed to be testing boundaries that had been clearly established for years. Viviana had always tried to be fair but firm with Elena, recognizing the delicate balance required in their relationship. She wasn't Elena's mother, nor had she ever tried to be, but, as Queen Regent, she had certain responsibilities for guiding the princess's development and public behavior. Lady Catherine, please have someone discreetly check on Princess Elena's preparations. I want to ensure everything is appropriate for tonight's event. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the princess's wing, Elena was putting the finishing touches on her appearance. The midnight blue gown fit her perfectly, its elegant lines complementing her youthful figure while maintaining royal sophistication. Her dark hair was styled in a classic updo that showcased the midnight sapphire tiara beautifully. Margaret watched nervously as Elena practiced walking with the tiara, ensuring it would remain secure throughout the evening's activities. Your Highness, you look absolutely radiant. The resemblance to Queen Isabella is truly remarkable tonight. Elena smiled, feeling a confidence she had never experienced before. The tiara seemed to transform her from a teenager into a future queen, and she could feel the weight of responsibility and privilege that came with her position. Margaret, I want you to understand something, Elena said thoughtfully. This isn't about defying Queen Regent Viviana or causing problems. This is about honoring my mother and beginning to step into my own role as future queen. I'm almost 18, and it's time for the people to see me as more than just King Alexander's daughter. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Lady Catherine entered with a polite but strained smile. Princess Elena, Queen Regent Viviana has requested a brief audience before tonight's departure. Elena's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained her composure. She had anticipated this moment, knowing that wearing the tiara would not go unnoticed by the palace staff. Of course. Please tell Queen Regent Viviana I'll join her in the blue salon in 10 minutes. After Lady Catherine departed, Margaret looked at Elena with concern. Your Highness, perhaps you should reconsider. No, Margaret. This is important. Queen Regent Viviana deserves to see what I've chosen to wear, and I deserve the opportunity to explain my decision. Elena made her way through the familiar corridors of the palace, her heels clicking softly on the marble floors. Servants and courtiers stopped to stare as she passed, some with admiration, others with surprise, and a few with obvious concern about the potential drama unfolding. The blue salon was one of Viviana's favorite rooms for private meetings, decorated in calming shades of blue and silver with portraits of previous queens adorning the walls. Queen Regent Viviana stood with her back to the door, studying a portrait of Queen Isabella that had been painted just months before her death. Your Majesty, Elena said softly, entering the room with perfect posture and grace. Viviana turned slowly, and Elena watched as her stepmother's ice-blue eyes immediately focused on the tiara. For a moment, Viviana's composed expression flickered, revealing a flash of shock, followed by what appeared to be anger, and then, something that looked almost like pain. Princess Elena, Viviana said, her voice carefully controlled. That's an interesting choice for tonight's event. I felt it was appropriate to honor my mother's memory at such an important gathering, Elena replied, meeting Viviana's gaze directly. The Harvest Gala was one of Mother's favorite events. Viviana stepped closer, her eyes never leaving the tiara. Your mother's jewelry has been carefully preserved for your future use, but I don't recall giving permission for you to access those pieces tonight. With respect, Your Majesty, I don't believe I need permission to wear something that belonged to my mother and will one day be part of my own royal collection. The tension in the room was palpable. These two women, who had maintained a careful balance of respect and distance for years, were now facing their first major confrontation over Elena's emerging independence. Elena, Viviana said, dropping the formal address, you're 17 years old. There are protocols and traditions that govern when and how certain pieces are worn. That tiara carries enormous emotional and symbolic weight for your father and for the people of Avalonia. Which is exactly why it should be seen again, Elena responded firmly. The people loved my mother, and they deserve to see her memory honored. I'm not trying to replace her or diminish her legacy, I'm trying to carry it forward. Viviana felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Seeing Elena wearing Isabella's most iconic piece of jewelry brought back a flood of memories and emotions she had spent years suppressing. When she had married King Alexander, she had accepted that she would always live in Isabella's shadow, but she had worked hard to create her own identity and earn the respect of the court and the people. This isn't just about honoring your mother, Viviana said, her voice rising slightly.
This is about you asserting your position and undermining mine.
You know perfectly well that wearing that tiara tonight sends a very specific message about power and succession.
Elena was surprised by the passion in Viviana's voice.
For years, her stepmother had been the picture of cool control and diplomatic restraint. This glimpse of raw emotion revealed depths that Elena had never suspected. Queen Regent Viviana, I have nothing but respect for the role you've played in our family and our kingdom. But I cannot and will not pretend that my mother didn't exist or that her legacy isn't part of who I am.
No one is asking you to pretend Isabella didn't exist, Viviana exclaimed, her composure finally breaking.
But there are appropriate ways to honor her memory that don't involve creating a spectacle or challenging the established order. The two women stared at each other across the elegant room, years of unspoken tensions finally bubbling to the surface. Elena could see pain and frustration in Viviana's eyes, while Viviana saw determination and defiance in Elena's youthful face. I'm wearing the tiara tonight, Elena said quietly but firmly. Not to hurt you or challenge you, but because it's time for me to begin taking my place as future queen. And that includes honoring the woman who wore this crown before me.
Viviana turned away, struggling to regain her composure.
When she spoke again, her voice was cold and distant.
Very well, Princess Elena.
But understand that choices have consequences, and tonight you're making a choice that will affect far more than just your appearance at a gala. As Elena left the blue salon, she felt a mixture of sadness and resolve. She hadn't wanted to hurt Viviana, but she also couldn't continue living as if her mother's memory was something to be hidden away. Tonight would indeed be a turning point, and she was ready to face whatever consequences lay ahead. The grand ballroom of Avalonia Palace had been transformed into an autumn wonderland for the Harvest Gala. Golden and amber lights cast a warm glow over the assembled guests, while elaborate floral arrangements of harvest wheat, burgundy roses, and cascading ivy adorned every table. The cream of Avalonian society mingled with foreign dignitaries, their jewels sparkling under the magnificent crystal chandeliers. Lord Chamberlain Harrison stood at the entrance, ready to announce the royal family's arrival. The anticipation in the room was palpable, as it always was when the royals made their grand entrance. Tonight, however, there was an additional undercurrent of tension among the palace staff, who had caught whispers of some sort of disagreement between Queen Regent Viviana and Princess Elena. Ladies and gentlemen, Lord Chamberlain Harrison's voice rang out across the ballroom, Her Majesty Queen Regent Viviana of Avalonia. Viviana entered with perfect royal bearing, her burgundy gown flowing elegantly as she moved. She had regained her composure completely, presenting the image of serene authority that the court expected. Her emerald jewelry caught the light beautifully, and her smile was gracious as she acknowledged the assembled guests with subtle nods. The crowd murmured their appreciation and respect as Viviana made her way to the royal platform, where King Alexander sat in his ornate chair. Her husband looked distinguished in his formal evening wear, though the effects of his recent health struggles were evident in the slight tremor of his hands and the way he seemed to tire more easily during public events. Your Majesty, Viviana said softly, taking her place beside the king.
You look very handsome tonight.
Alexander smiled warmly at his wife, reaching over to squeeze her hand gently.
Thank you, my dear. You're radiant, as always. Where is Elena? I thought she would be joining us.
She'll be along shortly, Viviana replied, her voice carefully neutral. She requested a separate entrance tonight. Alexander raised an eyebrow at this unusual protocol but didn't press the matter. In recent months, his declining health had forced him to rely more heavily on Viviana's judgment regarding court matters and royal procedures. The guests had settled into comfortable conversation when Lord Chamberlain Harrison's voice once again commanded attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, Her Royal Highness Princess Elena of Avalonia.
A hush fell over the ballroom as Elena appeared in the doorway. The midnight blue gown was stunning enough to draw admiration, but it was the tiara that caused an audible gasp from the assembled crowd. The midnight sapphire tiara caught the ballroom lights magnificently, each sapphire seeming to hold captured starlight. For many of the older guests, seeing Elena wearing her mother's crown was like stepping back in time. The resemblance between mother and daughter was striking enough under normal circumstances, but, with the tiara completing the image, Elena looked like Queen Isabella reborn. "My God," whispered Duchess Margaret of Westshire to her companion. "She looks exactly like Isabella did at her first harvest gala as queen." Similar murmurs rippled through the crowd as Elena gracefully descended the stairs, acknowledging greetings with the same warm smile that had made her mother so beloved. She had inherited Isabella's natural ability to make each person feel personally recognized and valued. On the royal platform, King Alexander's reaction was immediate and profound. His hand went to his chest as if trying to steady his suddenly racing heart, and tears formed in his eyes. For a moment, it was as if his beloved Isabella had returned to him, young and beautiful and full of life. "Isabella," he whispered, so softly that only Viviana could hear. Viviana felt her stomach clench as she witnessed her husband's emotional response. She had known this moment would be difficult, but seeing Alexander's face transform with a mixture of joy and heartbreak was almost unbearable. 15 years of building their life together seemed to dissolve in an instant as he was transported back to his first marriage. Elena reached the royal platform and curtsied gracefully to her father and stepmother. "Your Majesty," she said to Alexander, "I hope you approve of my choice to honor Mother's memory tonight." Alexander struggled to find his voice, still overwhelmed by the vision before him. You look so much like her, Elena. So beautiful, so regal." He reached out to touch her face gently. "She would be so proud of the young woman you've become." "Thank you, Father," Elena said softly, genuinely moved by his emotional response. Viviana watched this tender exchange with a growing sense of displacement. The natural bond between father and daughter, amplified by Elena's uncanny resemblance to Isabella, seemed to push her to the margins of her own royal family. She felt like an outsider looking in on a reunion she couldn't be part of. "Princess Elena," Viviana said, her voice perfectly controlled despite the turmoil inside, "you certainly make a striking impression tonight." Elena turned to her stepmother, searching for any warmth or approval in those ice-blue eyes. Finding none, she simply replied, "Thank you, Your Majesty." The evening proceeded with the usual formal activities, the receiving line, the ceremonial toast, the traditional harvest blessing. But the undercurrent of tension between Elena and Viviana was obvious to anyone who knew how to read royal body language. During the receiving line, Elena was the clear center of attention. Foreign dignitaries specifically requested introductions to the princess, curious about the young woman who so strongly resembled her legendary mother. Ambassador Reginald from the neighboring kingdom of Valdres was particularly effusive in his praise. "Your Royal Highness," he said, bowing deeply, "you are the very image of your dear mother. Queen Isabella was beloved in our kingdom as well, and seeing you tonight brings back such fond memories of her grace and wisdom." "Thank you, Ambassador Reginald," Elena replied with genuine warmth. "My mother always spoke highly of the friendship between our kingdoms." Viviana stood nearby, maintaining her diplomatic smile while feeling increasingly invisible. For years, she had been the primary representative of the royal family at these events, building relationships and representing Avalonia's interests with skill and dedication. Tonight, however, all attention seemed focused on Elena and the powerful symbolism of her mother's tiara. Duke Jameson of Northbridge, one of the most influential nobles in Avalonia, approached the royal platform during a brief break in the receiving line. "Your Majesty," he said to King Alexander, "seeing Princess Elena tonight reminds us all of the golden years when Queen Isabella graced our court. Perhaps it's time to begin transitioning more responsibilities to the princess as she approaches her majority." This seemingly innocent comment struck at the heart of Viviana's deepest fears. She had worked hard to establish her authority as Queen Regent, knowing that her position was inherently temporary but hoping to maintain influence as Elena matured. Now it seemed that Elena's dramatic appearance tonight was accelerating discussions about succession and power that Viviana wasn't ready to have. King Alexander, still emotional from seeing his daughter in Isabella's tiara, nodded thoughtfully. "Elena is indeed growing into a remarkable young woman. We should certainly begin considering expanded roles for her in royal duties." Elena felt a surge of satisfaction at her father's words, but she also noticed the way Viviana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The princess was beginning to understand that her decision to wear the tiara had implications far beyond fashion or family sentiment. As the evening wore on, the contrast between Elena and Viviana became more pronounced. Elena moved through the crowd with natural ease, charming guests with her intelligence and grace, while Viviana found herself relegated to more formal, ceremonial interactions. The tiara seemed to serve as a beacon, drawing attention and admiration wherever Elena went. During the traditional harvest dance, Elena was partnered with Prince Marcus of the neighboring kingdom, a young man close to her own age who had been a family friend since childhood. They made a striking couple on the dance floor, and several guests commented on how perfectly suited they appeared for each other. "Princess Elena," Prince Marcus said as they waltzed, "you look absolutely radiant tonight. That tiara suits you perfectly." "Thank you, Marcus. It feels right, somehow. Like I'm finally stepping into who I'm meant to be." From the royal platform, Viviana watched the dance with growing resentment. She could see the wheels turning in various nobles' minds, already beginning to plan for Elena's future reign and the political alliances that would come with it. The careful balance of power that Viviana had maintained was shifting before her eyes, and she felt powerless to stop it. The evening that had begun as Elena's tribute to her mother was becoming something much larger, a public declaration of the princess's readiness to claim her birthright and a subtle challenge to the established order of the court. The midnight sapphire tiara, dormant for 15 years, had awakened something that would forever change the dynamics of the royal family. As the harvest gala reached its peak, with guests enjoying the elaborate dinner and evening entertainment, the undercurrents of tension continued to build beneath the surface of royal protocol. Elena had excused herself from the main festivities to take a moment of fresh air on the palace's moonlit terrace, the weight of everyone's attention and expectations becoming overwhelming. The terrace overlooked the palace gardens, where autumn flowers still bloomed despite the cooling temperatures. The midnight sapphire tiara caught the moonlight, creating an ethereal glow around Elena's face as she stood alone with her thoughts. "Quite an entrance you made tonight," came a voice from the shadows. Elena turned to see her cousin James emerging from behind one of the ornate stone pillars. Prince James was the son of King Alexander's younger brother and had always been more like a brother to Elena than a cousin. At 25, he served as a captain in the royal guard and had always been protective of Elena's interests. "James," Elena said with relief. "I was hoping to find a familiar face who might give me an honest opinion about tonight." "Honest?" James laughed, stepping into the moonlight. "Honestly, you've caused quite a stir. Half the court is comparing you to your mother, and the other half is whispering about palace intrigue." Elena sighed, suddenly, feeling the weight of her 17 years. "I didn't mean to cause problems, James. I just wanted to honor mother's memory." "And you have," James said gently. "But, Elena, you can't be naive about the symbolism of what you've done. That tiara isn't just jewelry, it's a statement about legitimacy, about succession, about the future of the monarchy." Before Elena could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. Queen Regent Viviana appeared on the terrace, having obviously come looking for the princess. "Princess Elena," Viviana said formally, "your presence is required inside for the ceremonial closing toast." "Of course, Your Majesty," Elena replied, preparing to follow. But James stepped forward, his protective instincts engaged. "Aunt Viviana, perhaps this would be a good time for you and Elena to have an honest conversation about what's really bothering you tonight." Viviana's eyes flashed with annoyance. "I beg your pardon, James, but family dynamics are not appropriate topics for public discussion." "We're hardly in public," James observed. "And sometimes family problems need to be addressed directly before they become palace scandals." Elena looked between her cousin and stepmother, sensing that James was trying to force a confrontation that had been building for years. Part of her wanted to retreat to the safety of formal protocol, but another part recognized that James might be right about the need for honesty. "Queen Regent Viviana," Elena said carefully, "if I've done something that truly offends you, I would prefer to understand why rather than continue with this tension between us." Viviana studied Elena's face for a long moment, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation. What she saw instead was genuine confusion and a desire for understanding, the expression of a young woman trying to navigate complex adult relationships. Elena, Viviana said finally, her formal mask beginning to slip, when I married your father, I understood that I could never replace your mother.
I never tried to.
But, I have spent 15 years building my own identity, my own relationships with the people and the court. Tonight, watching you in that tiara, I felt like all of that work was being erased.
Elena was surprised by this vulnerable admission.
She had never considered how difficult Viviana's position might be, always living in the shadow of a beloved predecessor, always being compared to a memory that had been idealized over time. I never intended to erase anything, Elena said softly.
Your Majesty, you've been a stabilizing force for our family and our kingdom.
I respect everything you've accomplished.
But, respect isn't the same as acceptance, is it?
Viviana asked, her voice tinged with years of accumulated hurt.
You've always kept me at arm's length, Elena.
Polite, proper, but never truly welcoming me as part of your family. James watched this exchange with growing understanding. As someone who had grown up observing palace dynamics, he could see how both women had valid perspectives and legitimate grievances.
Perhaps, James suggested gently, you've both been protecting yourselves from potential hurt by maintaining distance. Elena, you were protecting your mother's memory. Viviana, you were protecting yourself from rejection.
Elena felt tears forming in her eyes as she considered James's words.
Had she been unfair to Viviana all these years? In her determination to preserve her mother's legacy, had she prevented herself from building a meaningful relationship with the woman who had actually raised her through her teenage years? Your Majesty, Elena said, her voice trembling slightly, I think I owe you an apology. Not for wearing mother's tiara, that felt right and necessary, but for never giving you the chance to be more than just my father's wife. Viviana was taken aback by Elena's honesty.
She had expected defensiveness or teenage rebellion, not this mature acknowledgement of their complicated relationship.
Elena, I've made mistakes too.
I was so focused on not overstepping boundaries that I never reached out to you the way I should have. I was afraid you'd reject any attempt at maternal guidance. The three of them stood in the moonlight, years of unspoken tensions finally being addressed. It was James who broke the emotional silence. You know, he said thoughtfully, maybe the real problem isn't the tiara or protocol or succession. Maybe it's that you've both been so worried about doing the wrong thing that you never tried to do the right thing.
What do you mean? Elena asked. I mean that Viviana has been afraid to be a mother figure because she didn't want to dishonor Isabella's memory.
And, Elena, you've been afraid to accept any guidance because you thought it would betray your mother's legacy.
But, what if honoring Isabella's memory actually means building the strongest possible family for the future? Viviana considered James's words carefully.
Queen Isabella had been known for her wisdom and her ability to bring people together. Perhaps the greatest tribute to Isabella would be for her daughter and her successor to find a way to work together rather than allowing old hurts to divide them.
Elena, Viviana said slowly, what if we started over? Not erasing the past 15 years, but building something new going forward? Elena felt a surge of hope at the possibility of finally having a real relationship with Viviana. I would like that, Your Majesty. But, I need you to understand that I will continue to honor my mother's memory in public ways. Not to hurt you, but because it's part of who I am. And, I need you to understand, Viviana replied, that my role as Queen Regent isn't just ceremonial. I have responsibilities to your father and to the kingdom that I take very seriously. Then, perhaps, James suggested with a smile, you both need to figure out how to share the spotlight rather than competing for it. As they prepared to return to the gala, Elena impulsively reached out and took Viviana's hand. Your Majesty, would you walk back in with me? I think the court would benefit from seeing that we stand together, even when we don't always agree. Viviana looked down at their joined hands, surprised by the gesture but touched by its sincerity. I think that would send exactly the right message, Princess Elena. James watched with satisfaction as the two most important women in his cousin's life began to find common ground. The midnight sapphire tiara had indeed caused an explosion, but perhaps it was the kind of explosion needed to clear away years of accumulated misunderstanding and create space for something healthier to grow.
As they walked back toward the ballroom, Elena realized that wearing her mother's tiara had accomplished more than she had intended. It hadn't just been a tribute to the past, it had forced all of them to confront their fears about the future and to begin building the kind of family that Queen Isabella would have wanted for her daughter. The real test, of course, would be whether these tentative steps toward understanding could survive the pressures of royal life and public scrutiny. But, for tonight, it felt like progress. The weeks following the Harvest Gala brought unprecedented changes to the daily rhythms of palace life. The image of Princess Elena wearing the midnight sapphire tiara had appeared on the front pages of newspapers throughout Avalonia and neighboring kingdoms, sparking discussions about tradition, succession, and the evolving nature of monarchy. King Alexander, energized by seeing his daughter embrace her royal heritage so confidently, had requested a series of meetings with his advisors about expanding Elena's official duties. The sight of Elena in Isabella's tiara had reminded him of his own mortality and the importance of preparing the next generation for leadership. "Your Majesty," said Lord Chancellor Robert during one such meeting, "the public response to Princess Elena's appearance at the gala has been overwhelmingly positive. Perhaps it's time to consider a more formal role for her in state functions." Alexander nodded thoughtfully from his chair in the royal study, where portraits of previous monarchs looked down from the walls. "Elena will be 18 in 3 months. I think it would be appropriate to begin transitioning some ceremonial duties to her, with proper guidance, of course." Queen Regent Viviana, who was present at the meeting, felt her usual mixture of pride and apprehension. She was genuinely pleased to see Elena growing into her role, but she was also acutely aware that each expansion of Elena's responsibilities represented a corresponding reduction in her own influence. "Your Majesty," Viviana said carefully, "I agree that Princess Elena should begin taking on more responsibilities. Perhaps we could start with some of the cultural patronage roles, the Arts Foundation, the Children's Literacy Program. These would allow her to develop her public speaking skills and build relationships with important civic organizations." Alexander smiled at his wife's practical suggestion. "Excellent idea, my dear. Viviana, would you be willing to mentor Elena through these initial responsibilities? Your experience would be invaluable." This request represented exactly the kind of collaborative approach that Elena and Viviana had discussed on the terrace after their confrontation. Rather than competing for roles and recognition, they would work together to ensure a smooth transition of duties. Meanwhile, Elena was in her private study, reviewing briefing materials about the various charitable organizations she might soon be overseeing. The midnight sapphire tiara sat in a place of honor on her dressing table, no longer hidden away but not yet worn casually. Elena had decided that the tiara would be reserved for the most significant occasions, maintaining its special symbolic value while asserting her right to wear it. Margaret knocked softly on the door and entered with the morning's correspondence. "Your Royal Highness, you've received several interesting invitations as a result of the gala." Elena looked up from her reading with curiosity. "What sort of invitations?" "Well, the Museum of Royal History has requested that you serve as patron for their upcoming exhibition on Queen Isabella's humanitarian work. The National Youth Council has asked you to speak at their annual conference. And, perhaps most significantly, the Parliament of Valdres has invited you to make your first official state visit next spring." Elena felt a thrill of excitement and nervousness at these opportunities. Each invitation represented a chance to step into her own role as a public figure while continuing to honor her mother's legacy. "Margaret, please arrange a meeting with Queen Regent Viviana to discuss these invitations. I want to make sure we approach these opportunities in a way that complements rather than competes with existing royal commitments." This request would have been unthinkable just a month ago, but the conversation on the terrace had opened new possibilities for collaboration between Elena and Viviana. When they met that afternoon in the Blue Salon, both women approached the discussion with a newfound spirit of cooperation. Viviana had prepared detailed notes about the protocol for each type of engagement, while Elena had researched the background and significance of the organization's extending invitations. "The Museum of Royal History exhibition is a perfect starting point," Viviana observed. "It allows you to honor your mother's memory while establishing your own public presence. The preparation work will also give you valuable experience in reviewing historical materials and crafting public statements." "I was thinking the same thing," Elena agreed. And the youth council speech could be an opportunity to begin articulating my own vision for the future, building on the foundation Mother established.
What about the state visit to Veldris? Viviana asked, reviewing her notes. That's a significant diplomatic responsibility.
You would need extensive briefing on current relations, trade agreements, and protocol.
Elena had been both excited and intimidated by this invitation. A state visit would mark her debut on the international stage as a representative of Avalonia. Would you be willing to help me prepare for that? Elena asked. Your experience with diplomatic protocol would be incredibly valuable.
Viviana felt a surge of satisfaction at being asked to share her expertise rather than being bypassed entirely.
Of course, Elena. I think we could create a comprehensive preparation program that would ensure you're fully ready for such an important responsibility.
As they worked through the details of Elena's emerging public role, both women began to see possibilities for a partnership that neither had previously imagined. Viviana's experience and diplomatic skills could complement Elena's youth and natural charisma, creating a stronger royal presence than either could achieve alone.
You know, Viviana said thoughtfully, when I first married your father, I had dreams of being a mentor to you someday. I imagined helping you prepare for your future role, sharing what I had learned about royal life. But I was afraid that any guidance I offered would be seen as presumptuous. Elena looked at Viviana with new understanding. And I was afraid that accepting guidance from you would somehow diminish my connection to my mother. We were both protecting ourselves from potential hurt.
Perhaps, Viviana suggested with a smile, we can honor your mother's memory by building the kind of collaborative relationship she would have wanted for our family. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. King Alexander entered, looking more energetic than he had in months. I hope I'm not interrupting important planning, he said, settling into a chair near the window.
Not at all, Father, Elena said. Queen Regent Viviana has been helping me think through these new opportunities. Alexander looked between his wife and daughter with obvious pleasure.
The tension that had marked their relationship for years seemed to be dissolving, replaced by a genuine working partnership.
I have some news that might interest you both, Alexander said.
I've been in communication with the Prime Minister about officially expanding Elena's role in state functions. We're planning to announce her appointment as Princess Royal next month, which would formalize her position as my primary heir and give her constitutional authority for certain duties.
This announcement represented the culmination of everything Elena had been working toward. The title of Princess Royal would establish her as the clear successor and give her the authority needed to represent Avalonia in international forums. Father, I'm honored by this trust, Elena said seriously. I promise to approach these responsibilities with the wisdom and dedication that you and Queen Regent Viviana have demonstrated. And, I promise, Viviana added, to support Elena's transition into this role with all the experience and guidance I can provide. Alexander smiled at his wife and daughter, seeing in their partnership a reflection of the collaborative spirit that had made his own reign successful. The midnight sapphire tiara, which had once symbolized division and competition, had somehow become a catalyst for unity and growth. As autumn turned to winter in Avalonia, the royal family began preparing for Elena's 18th birthday celebration and her official inauguration as Princess Royal. The midnight sapphire tiara would, of course, play a prominent role in these ceremonies, not as a relic of the past, but as a symbol of continuity and hope for the future. Elena often thought about that evening on the terrace when she and Viviana had finally been honest about their fears and hopes. The explosion that the tiara had triggered hadn't destroyed their family, it had cleared away the barriers that had prevented them from truly supporting each other. In her private moments, Elena would sometimes hold the tiara and imagine her mother's approval of the relationship she was building with Viviana. Queen Isabella had always believed in the power of understanding and forgiveness to heal old wounds and create new possibilities. The midnight sapphire tiara had kept its promise to bring out the best in the woman who wore it, not just Elena, but also the family that surrounded her. In honoring the past, they had found a way to build a stronger future together. As Elena prepared for her new role as Princess Royal, she knew that the real crown she wore was not made of sapphires and silver, but of the love, wisdom, and support of the family she had finally learned to embrace completely.